Welcome everybody to our annual Yamhill Carlton AVA Vintage Review. We do this every year. And obviously this one is going to address the challenges that were faced in the cellar with possible smoke effect on the fruit that was coming in. We're really pleased to have the panel that we have. We've got Anthony King, who is going to be our moderator today. And we've got Sean Davis from Marshall Davis Wines, and Siri from Highland and Northwest Wine Company, and Ben Castile from Bethel Heights. We were scheduled to have Drew Voigt from Harper Voigt, but he had an unavoidable conflict. So he's going to submit something to me, his thoughts in writing or on a video, and I will forward those along. We're also recording this, so I'll make the link to the recording available, and it'll be up on YouTube as we've done with our other presentations. So the way the format is, right now we've got a modest audience, so I'm going to let people ask questions on their own. If we start to get a bunch of people signing in, then I'll ask people to switch to the chat format so that I can moderate that. We're not interrupting our speakers too much. But with that, I am going to say welcome and turn it over to Anthony King.
Hi, everyone. Am I on? I'm Anthony King. I work mostly out of the Carlton Winemaker Studio, where I'm general manager and then make wine for several of the brands there. When Rebecca asked me if I could participate in this, I asked if I could moderate instead of be a speaker. I work with really small volumes, and so far what I've been doing is learning as much as I can, talking to others, and I have not actually done anything but lab trials. I've done 0 treatments myself on the wines that I've made, and then basically waiting for the wines to kind of settle themselves out and see where we are before I treat. So today, what we're going to focus on, I don't know if you saw, Anne did an amazing job at the symposium this year, talking about all the work that they did throughout harvest, both testing wines, treating wines, and then talked also about treatment at this point. So today, what we're going to focus on is mitigation of smoke impact at this point in time, what people have been doing when you have a wine that's in barrel or in tank and you taste the impact of smoke coming through. If you don't already know, I would say, first of all, there's several great pieces that have posted. You can go to Oregon Wine Board, and Anita Oberholster gives a very nice review from Davis of all the compounds and the amounts that we're talking about, treatment effects, those things, and then the following panel after that. But we're dealing with a range of compounds that are 70 plus different compounds. Mostly we look at 14 of those. And when you send something off for panels, then they'll send you these numbers that are typically in parts per billion, and then you have to correlate those to something. And that's part of what these sharing sessions have been so helpful with. And generally, you'll find people in the industry talking about guaiacol because it's a nice, easy number to talk about, but it doesn't mean that that's the compound that's causing the issues in the wine necessarily. It's one of the compounds. And so I know, especially when we get to Sean talking about what he's been doing, just keep in mind that as we throw out these numbers for compounds, those aren't necessarily the ones that are having the strongest impact on the wine. We don't actually know which ones of them are necessarily having the impact. And in most cases, it's actually the combination of all those different compounds and then compounds we're not even measuring that are having the bulk effect. And then the final piece that I'll add is that everyone has a different experience. We're going to hear from Ben Castile, who's dealing with a site that's down in the Eola Amity Hills, and that what the compounds that he might be dealing with based on what material was burning in fires that were affecting his region might be different than what we're finding in Yamhill Carlton. And in fact, most of the numbers that I've seen, Yamhill Carlton and Ribbon Ridge had less impact than other regions, which is a really nice thing. So possibly starting at a lower level. If we do get into numbers, there's 2 different ones that people talk about: free and total. So the idea is that the some of the compounds are bound up with sugar in the juice and then also in the wine, and they're released with time to be free compounds. And the free ones are the ones that you can aromatically smell, and then they're also the ones that you can taste. But also, when you taste a wine that has smoke impact, the your saliva actually will pull some of those bound compounds out and make it to where you can taste them. And I think that we'll ask the panelists here to talk a little bit about what they taste and how they're looking for it in their wines. I thought that we'll start with Ben, if that's okay. And Ben, I wanted you to start just briefly saying what you saw this harvest and then what you ended up doing in terms of picking, how much of your estate you picked and what your approach was. And I don't think we need to get too much into treatments during harvest, but you can quickly mention those.
Well, thanks, Anthony. Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me. I was, it's nice to be included in the Yamhill Carlton Harvest Roundup, even though I have very little to do with Yamhill Carlton. It's always nice to be included. So we're, 100% estate down here in the Eola Amity Hills. We didn't miss anything, 22 miles away from a fire. It was still quite smoky here for about 7 days. We're 100% estate. We employ our own crew. Our crew, of course, depends on harvest income. So there was never really any doubt that we were going to have harvest here. I talked to a few of my friends, a few of my peers, about really any illusions that just because we had smoked for 7 days and then it rained that we weren't going to be affected by it. We sort of knew that we were going to be. But nonetheless, we had harvest. It was a small harvest for us, probably not unlike a lot of you. We were sitting at about a ton per acre, which, just given, shatter around harvest, it was bad for us. I tried a lot of things.
Hey, Ben, can I interrupt?
Just out of curiosity, can you guys all see your?
Yeah, so
you
can, why don't you turn your camera off because you're going in and out, and see if that helps a little bit to keep your voice more clear. Is it there? Okay, Ben is frozen. So we're going to switch over to Sean.
Hunt.
And then when Ben starts, when he gets back on, then we'll go back to him. So Sean, can you do the same? Tell us a little bit about what you saw during harvest. Did you harvest everything? Go ahead.
Yeah, we went for it. I just figured, as a winemaker, this is kind of our job to figure out the problem. So we went full bore and brought everything in. For some sites, that might have been not the best idea, but I think we were able to manage pretty well, especially here in the Yamhill Carlton AVA. Numbers weren't crazy high compared to some of the numbers I was seeing out of Dundee and Chehalem Mountains and all that. So I felt pretty comfortable, at least with our Yamhill Carlton stuff. And then, like I was talking to you guys earlier, we had a client that was from Australia. He gave me some advice on just how to handle fruit during harvest. So we were extremely gentle on everything, pressing extremely light, like doing champagne cycles on all the whites and the rosés. And then for reds, we definitely didn't complete the fermentations all the way before we pressed off, let them finish off in tanks. So just to kind of minimize the skin contact. And that seemed to help pretty much, especially on the aromatics, at least. But then as we get further along in barrel, the textural issues came along, especially for the Yamhill Carlton fruit. Seeing a lot of that ashy, metallic-y kind of sensations on the palate. We use one other treatment during harvest on a couple of the more impacted stuff. We use some of the charcoal vegetable protein It's a product called, vegan, something like that. And it worked really well on the aromatics and flavors of some more of the heavily more impacted smoke tank. And it worked really well, actually. Didn't do a dang thing for the palate though. The palate it's still an issue on that site. And then let's see, numbers wise, I mean, it was very low to moderate, I would say, in the Yamhill Carlton. As far as numbers go, I'd say like single digits to upper single digits on the glycol. And then we were seeing much higher in Dundee and in the Chehalis Mountains, probably in the upper teens to 20s even. But we still brought them in and made rosé out of Chehalis Mountain because the numbers were so high. And then Dundee, we just kind of went for it. The owner of that particular label wanted to go for it, so we went for it. And I think we did an okay job at managing it.
And so when you were doing whites, were you pulling a press fraction out separate, or did you keep them together?
No, yeah, we were separating them.
Okay.
Yeah, and we went really light, and even on the champagne cycle, we didn't even finish. So I mean, we were leaving stuff on the table for sure, but what I saw in the rosés and in the Chardonnays for sure, that was the right move. You're not getting, I wasn't getting any aromatics or any textural components at all from doing that. I think that really saved our bacon.
And are you finding impact on those harder press fractions at all?
A little bit. Yeah, definitely more than the first few stuff. That's for sure. Definitely more on the reds, that's for sure. But on the whites, yeah, I mean, you see a little bit, but it's not as bad as the reds. But I did that.
How do you describe on the white wine? What are you seeing when you do find it sensorily?
Yeah, it's almost like doing maybe like a whole cluster white wine. It's just got that little bit of it's on the edges of the tongue, mid palate, just kind of a like slight tannin kind of thing, but you can tell that's not usually there.
Right.
Yeah. Aromatically though, nothing, at least from the fruit I've seen. My worst lot was out of Chehalis Mountains, and the fire came right up to her vineyard, and you could smell the smoke on fruit when it came in. But we did the light, gentle pressing on it, and it actually, I can't believe it to this day, it had nothing on it, and it turned out really well. We left a lot on the table there. We probably only squeezed about 60 to 70% of it.
Yeah.
But it worked pretty well. That client in particular was very happy with the rosé. She's already selling it right now. So.
Well, then take us through what you're doing in terms of treating wines where you're finding a smoke impact.
Can you guys actually see me now? Sorry about that.
Yeah, that's okay. We're going to finish up with Sean, and then we're going to jump back to you.
Okay.
Did you think we were all just sitting here waiting for you? We'll be back. All right, Sean, so you're going to tell us what you're doing for treating wines right now.
I kind of jumped headfirst into the SRX resin housing that's from Vinsai. It is, so they have a lock on it. He really didn't tell you a whole lot about it. It's some sort of food grade resin that you pass the wine over, and some sort of chemical reaction happens, and it takes away that real metallic-y, ashy finish. And for us in Yamhill Carlton, especially on the low to moderate smoke taint stuff, I had great success with it, way more than I was anticipating. The little bit of trials I did with his little handheld device where you pour just a bottle of wine through, you could see the improvement texturally for sure, but it wasn't like huge. And then when we brought in the bigger housing, we saw a huge difference. It went from a wine that was, marginally sellable to, I think, a wine we can sell in the mid-range and to even some upper range prices. I was really impressed with it. I kept all my lots separate, even the press stuff. I didn't think I was gonna be able to use the press in the blending, but after sending it through this housing, it worked really well. And it took away pretty much everything, at least in the Yamhill Carlton stuff. The fruit from.
And so, just to clarify, so this is Jeff Morrell's product that he's come up with, and he found a set of compounds that are on the TTB list of approved additives, and then the wine flows into a little housing. Is that right?
Yep.
Pretty small.
It's a couple feet. Yeah.
Yeah. And then, and you just, how fast do you pump when you go through that?
I went pretty slow. You can bulldog through it. So I used the bulldog,
Okay.
and I basically just did a rack and return with all of the wines. So
Okay.
I logged it in the tank and then just pump it back. And you don't want to go super fast. You want to go kind of this pretty slow speed, which was very torturous for me. But
and just since it's a bulldog, what pressure would you have the bulldog set to then?
I was doing about, what was it, like 12?
Okay.
Yeah, pretty slow.
So something like maybe five minutes a barrel, something like that.
Yeah, exactly. 5-6
Okay.
minutes a barrel. But it went pretty, I mean, even after one pass, it worked well, but the second pass, I saw the most improvement, I think.
Okay.
And I mean, texturally, it took that blooming effect, especially like the enzymes on your palate, how it makes it bloom and it just keeps going and going and going. It totally got rid of that stuff.
Yeah.
But I mean, if there was slight aromatics and smoke, obviously it's not going to do anything for that. It's just all textural and
Okay.
but really improve the wines.
And if you do have those, do you have lots that are showing as a smoky aromatic, and what will you do about that, or will you worry about it?
Yeah, I do have a couple lots that still have some smoke. Nothing from Yamhill necessarily. The owner of that is still determining what we want to do, but if we do, we'll probably go in that charcoal range and see if I can kind of get rid of that stuff. He still doesn't know if he wants to bottle it because his Yamhill Carlton is so good. So
Okay, that's
we're
great.
still waiting on that one.
Do you have anything else to add from your side?
Not right at the moment.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much. All right, Ben, we're back. Are you on?
I sure am.
All right, so you were in the middle of telling us.
I have no idea how much you guys actually saw. It took me a moment to realize that your face was completely paused, Anthony. So I'll just start from the beginning. So, I mean, we're 100% estate in the Eola Amity Hills. We didn't miss out on any of the smoke. The fires were 22 miles away, but it was still quite smoky here for 7 days. We employ our own people, so we were going to have harvest one way or the other. I mean, we would have, our entire vineyard crew would have missed out on about 30% of their paycheck. So we were going to have harvest. And I think I still held what in retrospect was sort of a naive thought that the rain that followed would somehow, wash away the effect. We were sitting at about a ton per acre just because of what we saw at bloom. So it was a pretty easy harvest, and thankfully we could really sort of lean in and work lot by lot to decide what we wanted to do. We tried a lot of different things. I mean, there was a part of me, and Anthony and I spoke on the phone about this. We're talking about phenols, and so I thought, why not at least take the approach that we could try to oxidize them early. We didn't add any SO2 to anything, and we were aggressively pumping everything over as cold soaks. Usually trying to turn over the complete volume of whatever the vessel was once a day. So be it a 1.5 ton bin or a 5 ton tank, we were just trying to rip it through our irrigator. We have the towed irrigator, so just kind of whips around, and we were using that on essentially everything. After a little bit, we were fermenting. Our temps were about 76 to 78 degrees. I didn't want things to get too hot. But then I also began to think I didn't want a very lightly extracted vintage in case there was smoke. I thought we needed to build at least some density to the wines in case we wanted to then take some things out later. So we thought about building, ways to build tannin. The Eel, Amity Hills, tannin's usually not much of an issue for us, much like it is in Yamhill Carlton. So we were using stems. I know a lot of the popular thought is that you don't want, additional surface area contributing potential smoke, but we were sort of past that at that point. So we used more whole cluster than I've used in a long time, anywhere between 30 to 50% on essentially everything. We didn't let anything stay on skins for more than 12 days. So that's including a 3-day cold soak. We were pressing things off sweet if need be. Much as Sean said, we weren't squeezing anything very hard in the press. I don't think we got beyond 0.6 bar, and then separated everything into many little tiny separate tanks. So a lot of 500 liter and 600 liter tanks, a lot of stainless steel drums. We got everything through ML as quickly as we could. Luckily, there wasn't much malic acid for us, at least in the Eel Hills. So a lot of things were already moving, even in the midst of primary. And then we waited. I think one of the mistakes we made was doing a lot of early evaluation, a lot of, to sort of build a lexicon of what we were talking about and to understand, the words we were all using. I tasted with my team of 3 a lot in the early going. And I think we unfortunately sort of convinced ourselves of a lot of things earlier than we should have. I think maybe some distance was probably the right approach. I mean, we were tasting, rinsing our mouth with water, and then moving to the next wine. And I think in doing so, we missed a lot of the early indicators. I think Sean talked about this a little bit with the blooming effect. What we do now is we taste a sample rapidly 3 times in a row, because I think, the protein in your saliva does, in fact, have a fining effect. And what it's fining is that sort of ashy, resinous character that it then just drops right down onto your gum line. And we missed a lot of that early. We haven't done a lot of remediation yet. We also have tried Jeff Morel's SRX unit, and I think it works to a certain extent. But I don't think it's necessarily, at least for us, and I'm saying this as somebody who's dealing with this, like a lot of you, for the first time. So I, by no means, just the fact that I have a microphone does not make my opinion an expert opinion. I'm muddling through like everybody else. But I found that it helps, but it doesn't necessarily completely fix the underlying problem. I'm happy to talk about numbers as well. For whatever reason, in the Eola Hills, at least at our site, our guaiacol numbers are not high. I have free numbers anywhere between 8 to 10, which I think, especially with new barrels, can end up being just noise. Our bound numbers are 7 to 8 for guaiacol. In the Eola Hills, I think, at least again in my neighborhood, I don't want to paint with a broad brush. The numbers that I have are mainly creosol numbers that are in the low 20s, scattered around. And one thing I will say in regards to data, I think it's going to be really interesting to look back at the data in 5 or 6 years. I would caution anybody from using the data as any sort of guidance as to what you have right now. We have found correlating numbers to what we're experiencing on the palate to be, at least in our case, not the right way to go. I've found very little corollary between the data of what we should be tasting and what we're actually tasting. And I would also say that I think the lab you send it to makes a huge difference. I don't really care if I've paid for Gordon Burns at ETS Private Plane twice over. I think that ETS is doing really good work. They're very helpful in terms of helping you understand what the data means. We've sent things off to a couple of different labs, mainly when ETS was so backlogged that they couldn't take our samples. And we found the numbers to be wildly different depending on what lab you send it to. So I would save yourself some money and not send anything to Canada just yet. And I'll end there.
Well, I have some questions here. So you talked about your creosol levels being higher. What are you finding sensorily in the wines that you're making?
I mean, as it relates to creosol, I have no idea.
No, I mean, I'm just saying, like, what are you finding? What are you looking for? So you said you take a sip and then you sort of you take a few sips and then you let it sit.
Yeah.
Tell us about your sensory experience.
I mean, I think the palate's the most important first step. And I think that the sort of ashy bitterness that I think we all understand what we're talking about, that you take a sip of the wine, you spit it out, and then 10 seconds later, you have that sort of ashy, grippy sensation. I mean, I think that it comes on more with time. Again, as your body tries to pH balance and you salivate, I think you get more and more and more. So that was the first thing that we started looking for. To me, aromatically, there are means of remediation for that. But the main thing we started with, I think once we sort of, realized that we had some smoke effect on wines, was to try to not focus too much, to think about that if I, let's say, put a glass of wine in front of you, Anthony, and said, there's something wrong with this, tell me what it is. If smoke is the first, second, and third thing in your mind, then we sort of had set that aside as, okay, we're going to deal with that in a very different way than if I put a glass of wine in you and you're like, well, okay, I'm not really sure what's wrong with it. It's a little bit thin and low in alcohol, and Ben did a bad job making it. That then went into a whole different camp. And we sort of separated things out that way. I think things where the smoke is obvious for our little brand, I think we decided just to move on from that. For things where it isn't obvious, for a lot of reasons, some of them are, the dirty economic reasons that we're going to sell out of wine. So we need income to try and then work through what can be done for remediation for things where it's not so obvious. I did some trials with Geosorb, so carbon, I think sold by LaFour, at between 40 and 50 parts per million on juice. So we destemmed and did some whole cluster, took all the juice out, treated that with carbon, and then added it back through. In hindsight, I would have done that on everything, and I would have gone in a lot heavier than I did. LaFour has published a really good paper looking at north of 100 parts per million, using, of course, their products. And I like their products, so I'll give them a little plug here. I think I would have done that on everything. As with everything, I think treating juice, your fingerprints are always going to be a lot less obvious than treating wine. And I think knowing what we know now, I think I would have continued with no SO2, maybe looked at one of the Mechnikauia products to avoid any sort of bacterial spoilage. So it's, basically it's a yeast that outcompetes everything except for Saccharomyces. Gone heavy with carbon, gone heavy with oxygen, and taken that approach. So at the moment we've got about, oh, sorry, Anthony, go ahead.
Oh, I think you were going to go into it, but tell us what you're going to do now with the wines that you decided aren't so impacted, and that you're going to try to move forward with them.
Well, it's funny. We use the SRX unit on everything that we're now getting rid of. We didn't use it on any of the stuff that we're going to try to keep, because it wasn't that bad, and so I didn't want to mess around with it if I didn't have to. I have a loose bottling date with my younger brother later in August, but we still haven't really committed to anything. I haven't bought glass. I haven't bought corks. We're still tasting and wrestling with this like everybody else. I think a light carbon fining is probably in our future. Everything we've kept doesn't necessarily throw that ashy quality. A lot of what we kept was higher in stem quantity, which again, it sort of pains me to say, because I think, at least for us here at Bethel Heights, anytime I start using large amounts of stems, the wines end up tasting more procedural than sort of place derived. But I think the vintage has sort of ripped all that out of my hands anyway. We didn't use any enzymes. We did a little bit on a bench trial with glucosidase and enzymes to see sort of how bad things can get. But I would, again, caution people who are looking at enzymatic treatments to release all the bound compounds and just deal with it when it's free. A lot of what's come out of Australia with the AWRI and down in California suggests that not all of the bound compounds are in fact going to become free. Some will become free, but I've seen very little evidence that over time, everything that's bound is going to come rushing out at some point. We sent a few of our 2017s off. I wanted a benchmark, and I was trying to think of the last year that it was sort of smoky in Oregon. In 2017, of course, the gorge was on fire, and large amounts of California. And it's interesting, we had things come back with a lot of bound guaiacol, 27 to 28 parts per billion, but 0 free. Now, again, these were finished wines, so a lot of that could just be oak. But I called it, you know, down to ETS with Gordon Burns in California. I talked to like the 1 or 2 people that I know in Australia, and they again were like, no, I mean, you know, be careful with enzymes, because just because it's there doesn't mean that it's going to be released. I don't know if it's an equilibrium. I'm not claiming to have any expertise in this, but I think we can't look at the bound number as a necessary outcome. Some of it will of course become free, but I would caution people into thinking that everything is going to become free.
And that makes sense. Just from a chemistry standpoint, there is that factor in chemistry that, you know, that defines how quickly that reaction will go one way or the other. And I think that's the part that we don't know. We know it's in equilibrium, but we just don't know if the shift is going to go all the way to that side. And what you're saying is it very well may not release everything, but just stay in some sort of equilibrium between free and bound.
Well, and especially with very little exposure to oxygen. I mean, I am not a big proponent of DM corks, but if I'm ordering corks, that's absolutely what I'm ordering. I think putting the wines in, you know, the probably the most antioxidant space they can be in. I mean, there's the double-edged sword to that, because we have, you know, a relatively low alcohol, high acid vintage at Bethel Heights. And if I'm just going to crush these things with sulfur and put them under a DM closure, that means the wines are going to taste underdeveloped, to say the least, probably in the short term. But for me, I think that's probably a better outcome than accelerating their development.
And what's the relationship with oxygen?
I don't know. I mean, you know, we think about the way things evolve. You know, everything in wine's in suspension and not solution, and things tend to come out of suspension, you know, preferentially with big gulps of oxygen. So I'm speculating. I know this is being recorded, and it's probably going to blow up in my face here in 2 or 3 years. But you know, that's sort of what we have to go with right now is just speculation. So I took the oxidative approach to juice. I'm taking the opposite approach with wine. We've been topping every 10 days. Everything we have in tank is under a full argon blanket, and we're keeping everything at about 35 free parts of SO2, reds and whites.
That's great. Thank you. As usual, a lot of good information and some very questionable stuff. Just joking. That was great. Anne, we're going to go to you. I know that you've done a lot of work. It's been very impressive, just both pre-harvest and post, but will you take us through how much you picked of your stuff and then where you've gone and what you've learned?
So we picked everything that we own and all of our clients won, just anything. We were down 30% just because of yield, which in hindsight, we're just, it's a good thing, just to give us a bit more time just to work with what we have. But we ended up just crushing about 3,400 tons, 20% of it being white and just the 80% red. Majority being Willamette Valley, except for a little bit of that fruit from the new properties we bought in Southern Oregon, you know, Valley. So we picked everything. We did a lot of micro fermentation, a little over 50 micro ferments. It's just because we were advised to do it. We used it just as an informational tool. We were able just to smell, taste, and just see, kind of have an idea of how affected each of our lots were. We picked from all AVAs in the valley, so we had just a wide range of fruit that were just more or less affected depending on where it's what. We have just some vineyard that was
just to clarify real quick before you go on, for anyone who doesn't know, the microferments are basically you're taking grape samples off of the vine before you pick, putting them into either a bucket or a small fermentation vessel and doing a 5 to 6 day, very fast, rapid fermentation so that then you can settle that out and then taste it and send it for analysis.
So yeah, the only difference is because of all the labs being backed up, we ended up not sending anything. So we kept samples in the freezer. We use all of our microferment really for sensory reason.
Perfect.
We were tasting through them. And again, based on how intense the smoke was showing, we kind of decided just how much of a work we would have just to do. Some of the fruit we brought in were less than 3 miles away from the fire, the biggest fire, and we knew when the fruit came in as a micro ferment, like the fruit, Bruno just brought a bucket of clusters and it was just smelling extremely smoky. So we knew we were just going to have issue with that wine, and just from that point we knew everything was going to be more or less affected. So all the fruit came in, and then just we started just working just a different level of smoke. Just the heavily affected fruit, we're just gonna get pressed and treated heavily with carbon. We have just, we're lucky enough, just we're big. So all of our Pinot Gris is going through what we call just flotation. So it's a way of just treating the fruit, the juice, instead of just doing a cold settling and just letting gravity do its job. We actually decrease the time it takes just to settle, and just we're able to fine at the same time. So we did some PVPP, some casein, and some deodorizing carbon at that stage, and that just helped us clean the juice really early on, and then work with a fairly clean juice. So that was for a Pinot Gris program. And for the reds, we did a wide range of treatment. One thing that was interesting though is we brought in some of our fruit really early on, just to try to decide what would be our approach on temperature, fermentation, and extraction. Because we've heard conflicting information. We want to ferment at low temperature, high temperature, do a low extraction, just gentle extraction, really heavy extraction. We heard everything and it's opposite. So we ended up just having all of these 3 tons laying around with the same fruit, and we tried different things, just fermenting below 68 degrees, fermenting up to 90 degrees, doing just punch down, just pump overs, keeping on skin for less than 5 days, of doing the full on protocol. And we found out that just there was, at least from what we were tasting, we found no difference in the smoke level. Everything we had was just the same. Well, at least it appeared just to be smoky no matter what. So we decided just to use our regular protocol, and even just pushing the extraction a little bit more. When we did not do extended maceration post-fermentation, we were just waiting until just completion of fermentation and then just going to the press. What we did try just to extract as many tannins as possible, because we knew that whatever treatment we would end up doing would just remove some of them. So we just went on high temperature, just anything between 85 and 90 degrees at the peak of fermentation. 1 pump over a day, that's what we typically do. So we're not that heavy on the extraction, but we didn't back off from it. So we ended up having, for the biggest majority, just some fairly big wine, just a lot of color, lots of tannins, some of them on the rougher side. But now just that we are treating the wine, we're happy to have them post-treatment. So just, I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but we've done a lot of treatment with carbon after fermentation. We brought an RO machine also to treat. And after all that is done, we're left with a wine that is a lot lighter, but it's still just, that still has a lot of fruit, a lot of tannins, and there's a lot of wine left after this treatment.
Since you've done so many things, I think what would be so helpful is telling us about your different, what your experiences of before and after with the different treatments that you've done. So whether that, I mean, RO, there's no one else that's on the call right now that's going to talk about RO, so that would be super interesting. And then also in specific, if you've been looking at different carbons and found any differences.
Yes. So on the carbon side, we did a lot of carbon treatment in the juice prior to fermentation. We would just do a cold ferment for 2-3 days, do sort of a delistage, and add different type of carbons at different rates. We tried the Lafort Juicor, and then we did the Enartis, the phenol-free were the 2 main one that we've used. And we did everything from 100 ppm to 1000 ppm. So we went just really, really high. Again, just trying to knock down the smoke really early on, just to see if we could clean up the wine early and not have to worry about it later on. I wish we had just the time and the tanks available to be able to do more, because in hindsight, just like after just tasting now, everything that was treated heavily early on just tastes a lot cleaner and a lot less affected than what we had to treat later. It is 1,000 ppm of carbon in the juice phase. You can't, we did side by side, you can't tell the wine has been treated except that there is no smoke that is left after. On finished wine, what we've done, so post-pressing on a heavily affected lot. So just to give you an idea, we had some fruit that came as with a free guaiacol of over 70 ppb. So extremely affected wine. We had totals of 180, and that's only counted the guaiacol and the methyl guaiacol. So not even just counting all the other molecules that are just there. So it was just extremely high, and we knew we had to do something just very early. So post-pressing, we were still remaining just above 60 ppb. And then we went and did some bench trial and then just some full-size trial using the phenol-free at, we settled at 750 ppm, just because after that it was stripping the wine a bit too much. And what we discovered is not only was it just reducing the smoke aromas and cleaning the palate, but it was also dropped a lot of the bound numbers. So that was a good way just to drop the bound just by almost 60% and the free by about 50%.
And you said that was at what level of carbon?
750 ppm of phenol-free. So the issue with the phenol-free carbon at that dose, it will have a small effect on the color as well. So if you don't start with the wine that is fairly dark, you will just notice it quite a bit. An artist came out with a new carbon the past few weeks called the SMK. It's just more, it's made just to specifically target just the smoke, as opposed to the phenol-free that was developed just to target the 4-EP just for bread. And it has a lot less impact on the color at higher dose. Not that it's what matters, but you still want just to have a wine that just looks like a good Willamette Valley Pinot. You just want a little bit of something. And the phenol-free at 750 ppm, the wine is lighter, it's still good, but it's because we also just started with just a very, very dark color.
Right. How do you get the carbon out?
We filter it out. So you can, it will settle to a certain extent. The majority of it you can just rack off, but you always have a little bit in suspension. So we use a cross flow because that's just the easiest for us to do, but just we've tried pad as well, just a plating frame will work. And then in addition to the carbon, we've been treating our wine with milk sometimes. And that's just, we do bench trial. We found that whole milk will help a lot on that, the bitter and the dry tannins at the end. So on the Willamette Carlton fruit, that's what we have the most, just like Sean was mentioning. It's not so much on the aromatic, but it is just on that just texture finish, on that that dry tannin, something that just regular fining won't help. The milk has been helping a lot. It will soften and drop that just that dryness quite easily.
And you said that you're doing that at 1% addition? What was
1% addition? Yeah, we've tried just everything between just 0.5% to 3%. We're legally allowed to use 1%, and that's what we ended up using. But I would suggest, yeah, for anyone just to try as much as they can. It's just regular whole milk, so it's an easy trial to set. And just not to be afraid of dilution either. If you do just your trial in a bottle, in a flint glass, you'll notice how it settles really easily. So you can rack off of milk just after 48 hours and you're left with nothing.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. How about reverse osmosis?
Yeah, so reverse osmosis, we send 3 of our wines to Wine Secret just for them just to do the trial, send it back, and we tasted them blind, outline afterward. It worked on all of our wine with just more or less of an effect on the wine. So we did the ultrafiltration as well as just the regular reverse osmosis. The ultrafiltration was returning wines that were really clean, but also really thin and light, and just it's not something we wanted to have to work with because there would have been too much just to rebuild afterward. When the reverse osmosis by the number did not clean the wine as much, but just made the wine just really pleasant and fresh and clean by our standard, in the sense that just the wine was just nice, pretty, and elegant. We wanted to turn them into Willamette Valley bottle, just a lower end Willamette Valley, and that was just doing the trick. So we brought the machine in and we treated a lot of wine. So when you do an RO, you can, they're talking a percentage of 100, 200, 300% of your tank, which is just 1, 2, 3, 4 passes of the volume of your tank. And instead of just treating a portion of our tank, we would treat the full volume. So the reverse osmosis is not only reverse osmosis, but they treat what they pulled out, they just treat with carbon. So that's just, you still send your wine through carbon when you do a reverse osmosis. It's just only the portion that goes through the membrane that is treated.
And as I understand that, the stream that's pulled out, as I understand it, you can correct me if I'm wrong, is actually contains the free compounds, but the bound compounds are actually not going through and being treated. So that if you do, you're reducing that free compound, and like Ben was talking about, there's an equilibrium, and the bound will slowly refill and the free will come back up. And so oftentimes the people that I've talked to that are doing reverse osmosis, they're talking about treating the wine, waiting for the free to re-evolve, and then treating the wine again, so that they're sequentially slowly dropping down their levels. Does that sound like the right description to you?
Yeah, so it will not drop the bound, absolutely. So the way we went, though, we treated our wine with carbon prior to the RO. With the phenol-free, that did drop the bound quite a bit, but left us with a decent amount of free. So we ended up just treating the free post removing the bound.
Oh, interesting.
So we're left with just the bound that is still there, with the free that is below 4, a bound that is in a 10 to 15 level. And we just did somewhat the math of saying, what's the worst case scenario? If all the bound was to free up, we'd still just be within a level that we're comfortable working with.
Okay, that's great. Go ahead, Rebecca, did you want to read that question?
Yeah, sure thing. Let's see. Samantha writes, she's heard of some people adding yeast holes, and she's curious what the panelists think of that, and whether anyone has tried that.
So I've tried yeast hole early on. It has a small absorption properties, but I could not see anything, nor in the tasting or in the numbers. It was just our lots were just too affected, I think, just for yeast hole by itself. Just I think the property of the yeast hole, just having that absorption, it was just not enough for what we needed. What I ended up doing is using yeast hole post cleaning the wine to help just with mouthfeel more than anything.
Okay.
You know, I thought it was interesting on a Lafort call, they did a survey during the call, and there were about over 300 people. They were mostly from California that were on the call. And one of the questions was, do yeast holes help with smoke impact? And while I've talked to a lot of people who feel like they do help, it was something like 65 to 70% of the people said that they wouldn't use yeast holes for smoke impact. And that might have something to do with how much impact are you dealing with. And we know that California's had, or Napa area, Sonoma has had some really tough time with impact. And if it's so high, it's just not making enough of an impact on those compounds. And do you have anything else to add of treatment and which way you're going with things?
No, so what we ended up doing for all of our wine is not one treatment seemed to be the ideal. So we're building our blends just with a different approach of different treatments. We have in one given blend, we will have a portion that would have been treated with a heavy dose of carbon. One would have been treated with carbon and the RO later on. And just, we also have been using a decolorizing carbon from an artist as well. It started as an accident. Just we did a lab trial, just ordered the product, did not order the right product when we ended up doing the addition in a 200-gallon tank, just realized that it was not the right dose for that particular product. The wine came out just looking like water. So we had just completely stripped the wine. What was left was alcohol, tannins, and acid pretty much. So it was really interesting because then we just started I sent it to the lab out of curiosity. And of course there was zero of anything. The wine was clean, there was just nothing left. And then just trying to use that in very small doses back into blends just to see how far can we push it. And we can use it up to 20% in the blend of something that is behind it, that is solid and has just, that is clean. So it was just a matter of also just putting some clean wine out there. And then just, so we stripped the wine and just blended with something that was just a lot more complete. And we still just lowered the level of just our guaiacol and our bound guaiacol, and just it's been working that way. So we've done that just in small quantities here and there. But yeah, at the end of the day, we're just treating just everything at different level and just blending them.
You're essentially, in some cases, using it to dilute the amount of those compounds down to a level to where they're below the perception threshold.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. That's cool. We should all go out and ruin a little bit of our wine.
Yes.
I was going to open it up. Rebecca, I don't know how many people are on the call, but open it up to anyone who has questions for the panelists.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great idea. We're scheduled out for another 15 minutes.
I have a question for Anne, if I'm allowed to do so.
Absolutely.
So Anne, are you using, or if there's proprietary secrets in here, by all means, don't tell me those, but are you using RO on everything, or is it sort of a case-by-case RO or carbon, or is it usually in tandem?
So the RO was not for everything. It's really just certain lots that we thought needed just to go through it. It strips the wine a bit more than carbon. I know it's odd to say, but it's definitely just harsher on the wine. So no, we did it on just some of our really large lots. But it's been every time in tandem with carbon. Everything that went through are been treating with carbon first. And again, the idea was just to try to remove the bound number and then just treat it through RO. So I'm talking about just all of our entry-level wine there. So everything that has been in tank from the get-go and has not just received any other treatment. And now post-treatment, we're putting them on staves and just we're working just to build the wine later on, when typically we would have done it early in the season. For all the wines that went into our barrel program, then we just treat it as juice, treat it post-pressing, and then just put them in barrels. And we used a high dose of new barrels this year. We took the opposite approach, just use the smokiest, biggest barrel that we had. And it's not working on everything. Definitely some lots, I don't think anything would have worked. But when it works great. Specifically on our Yamal Carlton wine that came with lower level of smoke and just bigger tannins, just using these big barrels just to counteract it, or even just to help the tannins mesh better, seems to be working really well.
Anybody else? Going once?
I have one more question. You mentioned the Enartis is it SMK product? That is actually not really available right now, is that right?
No, it's right now it's just we're waiting for it to be air freight. It's being manufactured in Italy right now. Yes, they had the high demand and we placed an order a couple of months ago, and we have some at the winery, just a few bags, if anyone just interested just to get a small amount to do some bench trial, because I'm assuming the majority of you will just need to treat just in the next few months and not just like right now. We're starting to bottle our red in 4 weeks, so we needed to get the wines ready soon. But I know they have a big shipment arriving at the end of June.
Okay. That's great. And if no one else does have anything, I just wanted to thank all of you for sharing your experiences and being open with everyone. That's super helpful.
Absolutely. Thank you so much to the panelists. We really appreciate it. And Anthony, thank you for all your work in doing the moderating of this. I know that you've been knee deep in research, so it's much appreciated.
I wanted to kind of talk a little bit about what we did, because I have kind of questions from the experts about what it is we're seeing. One thing that we did, we had a really small crop like everybody had, and we ended up rinsing all the grapes before running them into the destemmer, because we thought that the more it had rained, the better the micro ferments were tasting. And so does it make sense that some of the things that we're sensing are associated with just like the soot on the grapes and not necessarily the smoke compounds that would have been absorbed into the grapes, and that's why the rinsing may have worked?
I can answer at least a few. So there's a few different data points on this. The Australians did trials, and both in spraying the grapes on the vine and then also with rinsing the grapes in the winery. And several of them said, and same with people in Napa, that spraying on the vines didn't seem like a great idea. They felt like it might have actually kind of glued some of the debris onto it. Prior to harvest, when Anita Oberholster spoke, she didn't think there was actually an effect from ash, but then came out post-harvest saying that they actually are finding an effect from having the ash as a part of it. I think she just didn't feel like it must have, but once she did the actual research, she found that it did have an effect. The Australians and in Napa, people found that rinsing really did help. And so, yeah, there certainly seems to be other people that agree with you that it's a process that could help if you can actually get a good rinse on them one way or another. If anyone else wants to add to that.
Well, I know at least a couple people who are pretty well convinced that rinsing with ozonated water really helped. And I know a few others that are going to purposefully try to put grapes that have been intentionally smoked this year in sealed containers with ozone gas. My understanding about most of the smoke compounds that actually end up affecting is it's not necessarily the visual stuff on the outside of the grapes, but it's the very, very fine higher atmosphere particulate that ends up being the troublemaker. And I think if you can see it in juice, so that fermentation isn't mucking everything up, that maybe rinsing might, I mean, maybe it helps, but if you can find, it seems like if you can find it in juice and you're not actually seeing anything physically on the outside of the grape, and yet you're getting bound compounds in juice, I kind of wonder how much of an effect it really has, especially on really affected stuff.
There's another process that I saw people doing, and I don't know where it came from, but was dumping the very first part of when you press whites. So right after you dump, just dumping that out, but never saw any research on whether that was effective, or, it'd be interesting to fractionate out that juice and see if it actually does have more compounds.
So if I have just a question just about the hard press. So we did at the beginning kept our hard press separate on the red side on a couple of lots we had from the West Lane area. And tasting them and sending them to the lab, there's no difference of level of smoke of the free run and we did just free run versus press, not even hard press. So then we just stopped doing it because it's not in our regular protocol just to separate just the press from the free run. I'm just wondering if what we taste, I'm just thinking that there is that dry components, that texture thing that is unpleasant, if it's not due to the fact that our grapes were not the ripest last year. We ended up just picking a 2020 that has a little bit of that green edge. The tannins in certain area just never got just to get that just full on ripening because we had 10 days essentially with no sun. And I was just wondering if anyone had sent out to the labs and just actually confirm that there is just a stronger presence of smoke markers in the hard press.
That was another one, Ann, that I have to go back and look at the recording. My memory was that Anita actually said that it was higher in press wine, which was different from what Alyssa had told us prior to harvest.
Mhm.
I included my press wine because Alyssa had said it doesn't make that much of a difference, and I wasn't pressing that hard anyways, and have sort of regretted it ever since. I think Anita said that was, that it makes a difference. But I'll try to look into that and see if I can find some data on it.
I can at least speak
After Rebecca.
our numbers were not remarkably different with hard press to free run. I'll sort of corroborate what Ann's saying. We didn't see, I mean, I assumed that there was going to be a big difference, and we spent some money finding out that they weren't in fact all of that different.
Which then makes you question the idea of, like, can you not do extended maceration? What does that do? And all of those things. We know so little, it's amazing.
Well,
I know,
hopefully we don't have a
we need to
Oh.
brace ourselves, so just and learn as much as we can and quickly, I feel.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, good discussion. Any last minute thoughts or questions from anybody before we sign off? All right. Hearing none, well, thank you so much again, everybody. Really appreciate it. Thank you for our non-Yamhill Carlton AVA panelists. Really appreciate your insight. I thought it was very useful to have people who are working with juice and wines from other AVAs so that we could get a little bit of a more rounded view. And with that, I will say happy Monday and go forth and make great wine. All right.
Have a
Bye-bye,
good week.
everybody. Thank
Bye.
you.
Everybody.